See, we don't hate you for the most part. We just don't care, or we're sad and disappointed. Why Gen X doesn't want to be part of the generational war. They just don't care. It's who raised Gen Z? That's a good point. That's a good point. You can't hate Gen Z if they're your kid. Well,
There is a
I guess you can hate your
generational
kids,
war happening right now, and it is extremely
but you shouldn't. And if you do hate your kids, whose fault is it?
loud.
TikToks.
In fact, it's the reason why I created this channel. Why are they like that? Boomers versus millennials, Gen Z versus everyone, TikTok versus Facebook, skinny jeans versus wide leg, avocado toast versus the housing market. The arguments are everywhere, they generate enormous amounts of engagement, and approximately every generation is involved in them at high volume. Except one. There's a
Bro, I know somebody laughed at the avocado toast thing.
generation sitting to the side
That's how you know you're
of all of this, watching it unfold, occasionally rolling their eyes, mostly not getting involved.
That was a W comment, though. Shout
Not
out
because
to-
they have nothing to say, not because they don't have
That guy.
opinions, but because they have spent their entire lives being trained by circumstance to regard this kind of noise as largely not worth their time. That generation is Gen X, born between 1965 and 1980.
Okay. So Gen X is 65 to 90. So that would be my mom. So boomers would be my mom's parents, right?
Aged somewhere between 45 and 61, and
like
by
my
any
grandpa.
measurable standard, the most consistently overlooked, least discussed, least complained about, least complained to generation in living memory. A poll went around social media a few years ago asking people to vote on the most ignored generation. The options were Gen Z, millennials, baby
Absolutely not.
boomers, and the silent generation. Gen X wasn't even on the poll. That's about right.
What's the silent gen?
My name is Eddie Freeman. Every week on this channel, we look at why generations see the world differently, and sometimes why one generation barely shows up to the conversation at all. Why are they like that? Subscribe and you'll get a new one every week. To understand Gen X's relationship with the generational debate, you have to understand what kind of childhood produced them. Gen X grew up as latchkey kids.
does that
That
mean?
term has softened over time into something that sounds almost nostalgic, but the reality behind it was pretty blunt. Divorce rates peaked in the early 1980s.
Wait, what is latchkey? That's something to do with like you just had a key to your house so you can unlock it because your parents weren't home.
Just as the oldest Gen Xers were hitting their teenage years. Both parents working became the new normal. Childcare infrastructure hadn't caught up yet, so an enormous number of Gen X children came home from school to an empty house, let themselves in with the key around their neck, and figured out the afternoon on their own. They made themselves snacks. They did, or didn't do, their homework. They sorted out whatever needed sorting. Nobody was checking on them.
How they act like this doesn't exist today. Like there's so many kids that this is their life today too, you know.
Nobody
Like they don't have a dad or they don't have a mom or they have a single parent who has to work type of thing. And then they have to like live like that anyway.
was hovering. The parenting philosophy of the
But I guess it was just like you said right here, the philosophy was different.
era,
You
to
know,
the
whereas today it's like the helicopter
extent there
parents.
was one, was roughly, you'll figure it out. And they
And if your kids are home alone, there's cameras all over and you can watch them on your phone.
did. They had to. This wasn't a trauma narrative. For most Gen Xers, it was just Tuesday. You came home, you watched MTV, you made a mixtape, you handled your life. The independence was so total and so early that it stopped feeling like independence and started feeling like just how things work. That early self-sufficiency calcified into something permanent. By the time Gen X reached adulthood, they were arguably the least needy generation in American history. Not because of some superior character trait, but because they had been practicing being on their own since they were 10. Then they got to the culture and found it wasn't really for them either. The boomers had owned the cultural conversation since the 1960s.
You know what I hate though? I do hate when like a grown up does not know how to do like basic things. I was watching a streamer the other day. He's older than me. He's like 28, pushing 30. Couldn't peel a potato. And he wasn't trolling. Like cuz he was not trolling.
This does not look too good.
Just go like you can just go
like that. It's not like latching on. Longer strokes. Like this, like I'm scribbling on it.
Potato.
Woodstock, the counterculture, Vietnam, civil rights.
It literally took him 20 minutes to peel one potato.
Enormous, historic, loudly narrated events that entire identity to. The media was fascinated with boomers. The advertising industry was fascinated with boomers. The political class was boomers. Gen X arrived to find the conversation already full. There were 77 million boomers taking up most of the oxygen. So Gen X did what it was trained to do, shrugged, found its own lane, and got on with things. The cultural products Gen X produced reflected exactly this. Slacker, Clerks, Reality Bites, The Breakfast Club, the entire alternative rock movement of the early 90s, all of it was drenched in a particular kind of dracker.
Bro, what? I don't know what any of this is. Clerks, Reality Bites. I've heard of The Breakfast Club.
Clerks, Reality Bites.
Seth Rogen's in The Breakfast Club, right?
The Breakfast Club,
he's like my
the
favorite
entire alternative rock movement of the early 90s, all of it was drenched in a particular
Gen X. If Gen X is 90s music, Gen X has like some of the best music ever.
kind of dry, ironic, low expectation worldview.
Like 90s
These
music,
were not
70s, 80s, 90s.
idealists making art about changing the world. These were people who had
Span.
watched the idealists of the previous generation make a lot of noise and were deeply skeptical that any of it actually added up to anything. The word whatever
Wait, why'd he show Kurt? Because Kurt was Boomer or Gen X?
of the previous generation make a lot of noise and were deeply skeptical that any of it actually added up to anything. The word whatever as a cultural response to provocation, that was Gen X's contribution.
That's a good point, though. Like, that they're skeptical. Y'all are skeptical because of all the stuff that happened previously. Like, that was right after. Like, there's just a lot of bad stuff in the world, right?
Into the English language.
Just don't trust anybody because I just saw what happened.
And it was not accidental. It was a posture developed over years of being told things mattered enormously and quietly deciding they probably didn't.
Being lied to, the millennials.
Then came the millennials. Gen X had barely gotten settled into adulthood when 83 million millennials started entering the workforce, bringing with them a cultural volume that made even the boomers look quiet. Suddenly, everything was about millennials, their expectations, their avocado toast, their student debt, their relationship with participation trophies, their burnout, their therapy, their feelings about their feelings. Gen Xers, who had been waiting their turn, who had...
Millennials, that's the therapy people, right? A little older than me, and they're always like all about their therapy.
Quietly watched boomers cling to power through their 50s and 60s while expecting to eventually step into leadership, found themselves getting...
They're the parents that, because they're the ones having kids that are raising their kid. There was a video that I was going to watch about Starbucks kids, like these parents getting their kids all hooked on Starbucks. They're those parents. That's what the
leapfrogged. The boomers were still there. The millennials were right behind them. And the media, the advertising world, and the cultural conversation had essentially decided to skip straight from one to the other.
Okay, millennials is 96. I thought it was 2000. So Gen Z starts at 96. That's crazy. Okay, boomers is 49 to 64.
Damn. A Gen X writer summarized this with characteristic precision. We've created all these great
if you were born in the 40s, that means you're like 80 today.
Websites
that's almost 100
that now millennials waste their lives on. Built the platform, didn't get the credit. That's a very Gen X experience. By the time Gen Z arrived...
Dude, Gen X did build the internet. I was watching a stream, and we saw John Wi-Fi, the dude that literally built Wi-Fi, just popped up. He was all casual. Like, nobody knew who he was. I was like,
the OK Boomer Wars began, Gen X had been through 2 complete cycles of this. They had watched themselves get ignored while one generation ahead...
Gen X built the internet, but they hate the internet and they don't know how to use it.
And one generation behind fought for the microphone. Their response was, appropriately, not to fight for the microphone.
We hijacked it. Like, thank you. That's ours.
The generational war that's currently consuming boomers and millennials and Gen Z is, at its core, a war about who gets to be understood. Boomers want credit for what they built. Millennials want recognition for what they've had to deal with. Gen Z wants someone to acknowledge that the world they're entering is harder than the one previous generation.
Facts, but I think, rather than saying, I think Gen Z really wants to change the world. I'm like, honestly, like, look at the most. But is that a Gen Z thing or just a young, this age kind of thing? Like, every person in their 20s is like, we're going to fucking change the world, you know? Like,
God.
this. And then it doesn't happen. You're in your 30s, and then you kind of lose those hopes and dreams type of thing.
All three
Or is it like, right? That might just be an age thing rather
of
than a
those
Gen
are
Z
genuine
thing.
desires for validation. All three require a certain degree of public performance: the complaint, the clapback, the viral post, the generational hot take. Gen X's entire psychological profile works against that.
But I don't know, because millennials, I don't think ever really had that desire. Like, they're. Let me not offend anybody,
They
but like,
don't
I feel like they were not the most ambitious
perform. They are
group.
constitutionally allergic to public earnestness. The same culture that produced grunge and irony and whatever is not going to pivot to making TikToks about how they feel overlooked. Complaining loudly about being ignored is the most un-Gen X thing imaginable. If they did it, they'd be embarrassed by themselves. A leadership expert at a conference made a joke that went viral in Gen X circles. She said she had no advice for Gen X for 3 reasons. First, they don't need it. They're the most self-sufficient generation in history. Second, even if she had something to tell them, they wouldn't care. Third, even if they did care, they would never admit it. The fact that that joke went viral among Gen X people rather than annoying them tells you everything. They found it funny. They shared it. And then they went back to not caring. There's one more
Funny joke. All right. Back to not caring. Back
piece
to
of
not giving up.
this that doesn't get discussed much.
Hating my
Gen
life.
X is currently running things.
No, I'm just kidding. I don't think it's a hating your life. It's a different thing, right? It's just like,
Quietly,
done
without
yet?
much fanfare, without the generational brand that boomers wore like a badge and that millennials
what show is this? That guy that you can barely see in the corner, his glasses from the behind, I can tell who he is. I've seen his face before.
and Gen Z have built their entire internet identities around,
Office
Gen X
Space?
is actually in charge of a lot. More than half of Fortune 500 CEOs are Gen
Dude, yeah, I was just about to say, isn't like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos
X. Jeff Bezos,
like the guy? Yeah. Mark,
Elon Musk, Satya Nadella.
that is not Elon Musk. That is not Elon. Where's Elon? Bro, that is. I'm sorry, that's
Larry
not Elon.
Page, Sergey
My guy.
Brin, the people who built the infrastructure of the digital age and currently run most of it. All Gen X. They also run most of the middle of the economy. They're the managers,
Okay.
the directors, the people who actually execute whatever the boomer bosses decide and translate it for the millennial and Gen Z employees. One workplace expert described Gen X as the bridge generation. They entered a workplace dominated by boomers, adapted to it, then had to turn around and adapt again when millennials flooded in. They've been translating between generations their entire working lives. They are doing this without making it a whole thing. No manifesto, no hot takes, no TikTok series about what it's like to be Gen X in a multi-generational workplace. Just the
That's true. No behind the scenes fluff. So Gen X is like 40s. I feel like a lot of older celebrities, rich people, Gen X, like rich people celebrities would benefit so highly from like streaming and making videos and stuff like about their day-to-day life because they have some of the most interesting lives because like this guy said, like they built everything today. Like they're the billionaires, the millionaires, the CEOs and stuff. And it's like they have some of the most I think interesting lives for real, but they would never show it.
work. The irony at the heart of this episode is that Gen X is actually the generation that most people on this channel should probably pay most attention to. They are the bridge. They have working relationships with every generation in the current workforce. They can talk to boomers because they grew up respecting self-sufficiency and not complaining. They can talk to millennials because they understand economic precarity and they helped build the internet culture that shaped millennial life. They can talk to Gen Z because they genuinely don't care about status and hierarchy in the way that makes younger workers nervous. They're the only generation nobody is fighting with. And
That's honestly kind of facts. Because I feel like I do get along a lot better with older people than I do people my age or a little bit older than me. Like, I can't really do it. But with
Reason nobody
older
is
people, like, yeah, like
fighting
that
with
age,
them is the same reason nobody
pretty
is
chill.
fighting about them. They decided a long time ago
Dude,
that
my
the
uncle's the
fights
epitome of Gen
weren't
X.
worth having. Whether that's wisdom or just very
Just nonchalant, right? That's
well
like the
practiced
word.
indifference is probably
Like,
the most Gen X question anyone could ask.
what is this? Why Gen Z doesn't get the "I hate my wife" joke?
Damn, I'm on my Britney shit. Oops, I hit again.